Well, here I am above the River Lea near Ware in Hertfordshire, and downstream in that direction is Stanstead Abbotts, and upstream in that direction is Hertford. And what's interesting about this part of the world is that it's here, or somewhere near here, in 895 that King Alfred theoretically dammed or blocked the River Lea, trapping the Danes and compelling them to walk to Bridgenorth in Shropshire. Let's find out a little bit more. Now, seemingly, Alfred had two forts, one side or other of the Lea Valley. Behind me here, you can't really see it, and in fact there's very little left to see, is an earthwork structure which may actually date from the English Civil War. It's hard to tell. On the other side, in the far distance, you can't quite see it here, is the church at Great Amwell, or Emma's Well, an early Anglos Saxon settlement on the other side of the Lea. There's a spring there which still exists today, and beyond the church is, or was, some kind of camp, according to certain records, although from what I can see and what I've been able to find out, very little or nothing remains of it today. It has been suggested, in fact, that that was the camp of the Vikings or the Danes when they came up the River Lea. If that's the case, that's quite remarkable, in that it could suggest that the church, in the manner of that at Repton, was used as some kind of gatehouse for the camp. I find really it's a little unlikely, because there are no earthworks left. There's no trace of the original Saxon church. There is a Norman church there, or the origins of a Norman church with an apse, which is interesting in its own right. Perhaps it was the Danish camp, but there are so many perhapses about this whole story, taking up maybe 100 words in the Anglo Saxon Chronicle, so it's difficult to say. But, you know, something was written about it. They were trapped here by Alfred in some manner. I don't think it was in the manner of the Ladybird book of Alfred the Great, where the artist John Kenny shows the River Lea bereft of water and the ships all high and dry on the mud. To do that here would be a phenomenal feat of engineering to stop the waters coming from the hills into the Lea. It's just highly unlikely. But L.G. Guard Peach, Lawrence Dugard Peach, and John Kenny wrote such a wonderful series of books for Ladybird that it seems such a shame to trash their memory. Sorry, L.G. Guard and John. But I don't think it happened, not in the manner that you've shown. But one thing is interesting about this area, and that is that Ware means in Old English, waras, a ford or shallow area of the river. It's known that in medieval times chains were put across the river here at Ware to stop boats going to Hertford. So it's quite possible that Alfred built a blockade at Ware, trapping the Danes between Ware and Hertford. That seems quite likely. Now here, I'm walking down what was the Buntingford branch line, which connected Buntingford towards the top of Hertfordshire with Stanstead Abbotts and ultimately to London. And what's interesting about this is that it follows, as did most travel in the early days, river valleys. And in this instance it follows the River Ash, and we're about to cut under a lane here, and then we head into the Lea Valley itself. The river opens out into the Lea Valley. Most of the valley has today been dug out for gravel, but there's a small section still left which survived until which still survives today, which represents what it would have looked like here until the 1960s at least. Let's go and have a look. What you see behind me is the Lea Valley as it used to look, certainly between Stanstead Abbotts and Ware, flat area. Obviously this has been at some point perhaps used as sheep pasture. Many of the trees have gone, but if I swing around here you get a feel for obviously that's a gravel pit now, but look at the reeds and the willows and the various other trees in this valley. Typically you'll find alder here and willow. In fact, a local farmer was telling me he's now growing willow for cricket bats down here, and I caught him the other day lopping them so to keep the trunks straight. They're the best kind, he says, for the cricket bats. But you can get a feel down here of how this valley once looked, probably all the way down to London, marshy. The river was not a single course as it is now. It certainly wasn't the canal it became in 1770, and it probably formed a series of rivulets up and down the valley, and navigating them must have been quite a challenge at times. So for the Vikings or the Danes to get this far up and then find themselves trapped by Alfred must have been quite a situation for them. But what is testament to their ability is that they managed then, presumably by following the border of the Danelaw, to get all the way to Bridgenorth in Shropshire and up back to the River Severn, and then they have access to the sea. I mean, it's just incredible how much people knew the land back then. You know, we have maps and everything, but they would have had rivers, local knowledge, talking to people. Do you know where the next river is, the next town? And that's how they would have got around. Absolutely incredible. So here we are, and we're in the shadow here of Easney. I can't quite see it, but a little bit of etymology here. Easney, the island of Isa or Essa, gives you an idea of how marshy this area was, because Easney today is a large mound, and it adjoins an area of raised moorland. So it's not really an island, but what it probably was a ness or projection into a very marshy area, which then gives you an insight as to how this land was seen. So Isa's ness, this ness jumping up, pointing out into the valley, belonging to someone called Isa. Some people, by the way, have translated it as Iron Island. I'm not quite sure that stacks up, but I'm quite prepared to be proved wrong on that. But yes, there's lots of Saxon names around here. Easney, Emerswell, Stanstead, and of course Ware, the ford. So now I'm walking along the canal side of the River Lea, and I'm heading towards the old ford at Ware, which we're going to take a look at now. So here I am, actually in the middle of the old Roman road as it heads towards the crossing at Ware behind me. And of course it was this crossing and the ford which the Saxons used to give the place its current name, Ware, or Waras, the ford, very simply, similar etymology to my hometown of Warrington, which was the first ford crossing on the River Mersea from the sea. As you can see, the road is actually quite wide. It's defined by this hedge behind me here and another over there. So I would say it's probably 90 feet to 100 feet wide, so there would have been a ditch on each side and then raised up, and this field preserves its passage. I'm going to swing round now behind me, because you've got the rest now of the floodplain of the Lea Valley. directly behind me now is the current railway, and behind that the valley rises and the Roman road continues. You can't really see it at this level, but later on in the woods heading south towards Broxbourne and beyond, there is a straight track bridleway which still replicates the path and runs the course of the old Roman road, which in the other direction heads up towards Braffing and then onwards to places like Cambridge and beyond. But this is behind me here, you can probably see in the background the current A10. This road was built in the, I think the late 60s or early 70s. Before then, all traffic heading north to Cambridge used to pass through the centre of Ware. And Ware is an old maltings town, a very narrow high street. You can imagine the chaos in the 60s and earlier as traffic built up during the traffic revolution of the 60s and 70s onwards. But you can get an impression here of the size and width of the Lee Valley, which the Vikings and the Danes would have had to navigate on their way up, and back then it would have been covered in trees. There would have been at least 1 or 2 rivulets running through here, and that is preserved remarkably or a sense of it's preserved in a map of Hertfordshire made in the 1760s. Which shows the valley before the river was canalised and before the railways arrived. And so we get a sense of what the Danes were facing. So let's assume that they'd passed the ford at Ware. Then somewhere behind us, between here and Hertford, is potentially where the Viking fleet was trapped by Alfred. And then maybe they headed north on the old Roman road, quite possibly. Let's go and have a look a little bit more closely at the river. I'm walking towards the modern A10, which is all the rackets and noise you can hear in the background, and I'm following the River Lea behind me. There it is. And what I want to show you here is just how damp the ground is. Today, between Stanstead Abbotts and Hertford, a distance of perhaps 5 miles at most, there are 3 locks, which means the river drops by roughly 6 feet on each occasion, certainly at 2 of the locks, and then there is a weir as well as a lock at Hertford. Perhaps the dip is less, but you know, we might imagine a drop of water level between Hertford and Stanstead Abbotts without those locks of perhaps 15 up to 20 feet. So if you consider what Alfred was doing, it seems extremely unlikely that he would have been able to dam the Lea to trap the Vikings in. He must have blocked the Lea. To dam it, to drain it of water, as shown in the illustration of John Kenny, is extreme. I mean, all it would have done, I think, is trapped the water upstream, and when broken would have released a deluge, probably enough to have flattened what was London and certainly many of the settlements further downstream. So I consider that actually unlikely, and it's more likely that he blocked the Lea at somewhere like Ware. So we might consider that as a shallow area. We could block it with stakes, chains, rubble, or even men. And that, I consider that's probably more likely than the suggestion of John Kenny and Eldegard Peach. So it's fascinating to consider that here, in the shadow of the current A10, with the traffic roaring by, that that's 1,000 years ago or more, King Alfred trapped the Danes on the River Lea, somewhere near here, between Ware and Hertford. Sadly, the silence isn't evocative. It's just noise and forgotten history, and a few random lines from the Anglos Saxon Chronicle, written so very long ago.